I'll call this June 2022 meeting of the Housing and Community Development Commission to order. We'll start with a consideration of the meeting minutes from our May meeting. Do we have any comments or corrections, or would we like to go to a motion?
I wasn't here, so I don't feel comfortable making the motion.
Oh, I'll make the motion. Yeah. To approve minutes? Yeah.
Do we have a 2nd?
I'll second that.
So we have Kyle and
Looks good.
Carol. All in favor, say aye.
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 They were in a good font.
Any opposed? Me. After a year of being chair, I've never learned the fine art of speaking into the microphone, so I'm still working on that. We'll go on to number 3, public comment on items not on the agenda. So I'll remind everyone that we have introduced public comments for items that are on the agenda, and I'll remind myself again to call for those on items 4 and 5. But before that, do we have any public comments for items that are not on tonight's agenda? We do not. Number 4, this is our discussion of the city's Affordable Housing Action Plan draft, and with particular notice on the recommendations related to this commission. So in your packet, there was quite a bit of information that pertains to a historical discussion, a past discussion that we had on the preliminary recommendations. I hope everyone enjoyed that. It was a festive discussion. It's nice to look back at that. But this discussion that's just for historical information. This is about the final plan that was included as a link. So do we have any comments on that?
Yeah, I watched Tracy's presentation. I thought it was great. As far as what the plans put together, as far as things for council to act on, I think they hit important things. I think the only thing that struck me odd was there's one section out of it about like staff should really make recommendations to HCDC before we have discussions on stuff. Like that was one of the things, and I just thought that was weird because you guys have always given recommendations to us. At least as long as I've been here, I've never not had a decision without a recommendation from staff. So I thought that was a lot, and there was some discussion about wanting us to be more transparent.
I think Erica might have historical information on that, because I don't think you have always made recommendations to.
Yeah, I think part of it is the aid to agencies, which we haven't gone through in about 3 years, so that will be this fall. I don't think historically we've given staff recommendations for that program. I know we did in the most recent round. And I'll also note that in one of the recent rounds, staff gave recommendations, but the commission chose to ignore the recommendations. Sure. So I think I was referring to that program. I think CDBG and Homely have historically always given a staff recommendation in some way or another.
That was the only part of that presentation that I was like, wait, like I'm on that committee, like. Well, I'm pretty sure I've heard recommendations.
We had that discussion in the very first meeting.
I have a comment.
And there are people who didn't want recommendations. I know I did, because I just thought it was foolish not to have staff, give us their thoughts on things,
Well, historically, for someone who's been involved in the process for many years, staff never, there was a time where the commission said, no, we don't want staff recommendations. I really believe that it's very important. I think the staff are hired because they're educated and experienced, right, and they know the rules. Yeah. And I think that this is great that we're a volunteer commission, but planning and zoning does it.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's a great recommendation. I just think historically it wasn't.
That was my, like I said, that was my only confusion when I was watching the video, because I only have a couple years of being used to having staff give recommendations, and either we agree or we don't. But yeah, it's always there. So I thought the plan's great. I mean, obviously now it's going to come down to council and staff having to figure out all the parts that finding the funding and making it work. 3% increase every year, fantastic. Obviously from the private landlord side, I that discussion of the risk mitigation fund to help offset some of those risk concerns from landlords who don't take HCV. Very important. I mean, we've been beating that drum from the Greater Iowa City Apartment Association for 10, 15 years. So I loved the discussion in the LIHTC, I'm not going to say that right, LIHTC. LIHTC. Like, I love the discussion about taking away the zoning requirements, that if it's on a certain arterial road, that it doesn't have to go through a secondary request, that if it's affordable housing, I like the fact that they can they're talking about expansion to 4 bedrooms. Right now, I guess and I didn't know it until Tracy talked about it, which is right now the national thing is 4 or 5, but Iowa City has a rule that LIHTC can't be more than 3, which I can tell you how many families we cannot house because there are more than 6 people in the family and I can't put them in a 3-bedroom. So I think it's great. Yeah, I didn't have any real issues from my side of thing. I thought it was, well, we'll go back to, I still think it's weird it's bypassing us entirely, but yeah, I thought it was a good report. I haven't read through the whole thing. I printed it out today, but I did watch the video, and yeah, I thought Tracy's presentation was spot on. So
what about the other issues about the allocation, like about the inconsistent scoring and stuff like that? Is there history someone can share?
I can't hear you very well.
I'm sorry, I was asking about the other issues in this letter about how the funding is allocated, like the inconsistent scoring or lack of experience or things, the other items.
The second of the 2 recommendations about HCDC, right?
Or any of the others beyond that we ignored staff recommendations.
Well, I mean, to share a brief history on that, basically, we have, it refers, I believe, to the aid to agencies funding, and every 2 years now we do that, and there's usually some sort of imbalance in the amount of funds, so that we have to decide what to do with the rest of the money, and this becomes contentious. Do you give it all to the high-scoring agencies? Do you spread it evenly? Do you give it, in one case, I believe, to the low-scoring agencies? So that I believe was a recommendation that we set some sort of consistent process for that, which I would agree with and would recommend strongly that all of you do that next time you do aid to agencies funding.
Was that recommendation referring to aid to agencies or the home funds? Because
I thought it was aid to
it was
agencies,
just,
but I'm not sure.
They didn't specify. It was just
Okay.
vague, at least in Tracy's presentation.
It didn't specify, right?
It might be more specified in here. I don't know.
I took it to be about aid to agencies, but I could be wrong.
If you recall, the beginning of our year, we were challenged with the issue at Little Creations. And I think you actually were the one that told me that there were a lot of concerns last year whether or not they could actually complete the project.
Yeah, for sure.
But they got the funding anyway. So I guess that's what I was thinking about.
I see.
I mean, I think, I'm not going to disagree with you. I do think that there are problems with the scoring and the funding, and have tremendous problems being on the other side of the table for years, just tremendous issues with decisions that this commission made about who to start with. Why be a high priority agency if the commissioners were going to decide to start with a low priority? But that's an aid to agency issue, and I hope that we can tackle that next year, because that's the reason I'm here. And if we don't get to it, I'm going to be frustrated because I want to see some changes.
And I think the only reason we didn't tackle it this year was just because we didn't have a round. But I think you definitely should tackle it next year. But I am curious about this question. Is there some sense that second recommendation wasn't about aid to agencies? I thought it clearly was.
I thought it wasn't, because it came out in that report.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the things that Becky has mentioned, things that have happened in the past, that agencies have expressed that they want to know how the scoring is going to take place.
Right. Yeah.
I know like the Human Rights Commission, the way they score it is that if you get the highest score, you get your full allocation. They kind of just work their way down with the scores.
Yeah,
Whereas we might, with CDBG and home especially, we might weigh other factors.
Yeah.
Like we have in recent funding rounds. Yeah, I think I would say this is mostly from aid to agencies, but
Okay.
the commission would have to decide how they want to score that. And I will note that at your next meeting in July, we are going to have the scoring criteria and the application for aid to agencies because that's starting up soon. So those decisions will have to be made next month ahead of that funding round.
So that's the opportunity then to tackle that next month. Good luck. Go for it.
Can I go on the record to say that both of those I ignored entirely because I think they're junk? I think you're never, if you have a committee of people who are going to sit down and have discussions as a community as to making the best decisions, you can never have a completely non-subjective scoring system that just outlines, well, if this rule happens, this, I think it's, I have been on this for a couple years. I have never seen us not be able to come to some kind of common agreement. And I know that's not historically true. I know in the past I've heard there have been other problems. I guess maybe I've just been blessed that we have sat here and I have, even in those times that we have made some decisions to throw money maybe to some of the lower scores because we want to give them a chance. I think in every single situation, even the ones I don't always agree with, it was the right thing to do as a committee. So I sat there and I listened to Tracy talk. And here, Becky, I'm coming from a standpoint, I've never had to be out here begging this committee for money. So I've never had to feel let down or cheated or screwed over because of a decision here. So I'm coming from purely a citizens committee member viewpoint of we're sitting here and trying to make the best decisions to recommend to council for how money's spent. And so when Tracy made both those comments and was up on the board.
But I mean, I would say even if, I agree with you, you can't specify every rule in every scenario, but there is one specific scenario that we've seen that a couple people have mentioned that we could specify, how to deal with that aid to agency money in particular.
And have I not done aid to agency yet?
Yes, you have, but I want to respond to that. Kyle, I think last month.
Oh, no, I wasn't on that first time around. I wasn't here.
You were here the last time. Anyway,
This last little group a couple months ago. Yeah, okay.
the legacy and the.
I want to respond to what Kyle said. I believe last month you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were talking about, I remember a conversation, hearing something like, if the city really wants to help, take a look at the number of times the approval process for zoning, for permits, or, you're talking about ways in which, the city could help landlords, make it a little bit cheaper, for landlords to be able to rent out housing and things like that. I learned from you. Yeah. I don't know the housing side, so I learned from you. I want you to, I don't want to hear that a funding process is junk, because it's not just begging for money, but it's livelihood. And last week, last month, I specifically asked the agencies with regard to their pay that they have to give to their employees. So their direct care workers, I think Shelter House went from pre-pandemic at $11 an hour to well, if we're post, I don't know, now to $15 an hour. That is what, 40% increase? It's got to come from somewhere. And I think that we have a responsibility to take a good hard look at that. And if we can't be just a group of citizens, if we need help in figuring out how to come up with the best funding model possible and how to make those decisions, let's get it. Let's get some training. Let's do whatever. But I think that agencies are counting on us. It's a chunk of money that
I guess I'm confused where I'm not agreeing with you on that.
Well,
my statement is what we have been doing is learning from each other. When I sit down and I listen to you guys, Mary Ann and you, and find out what matters to these agencies, it does help me. My statement is simply the way it was presented was that we just subjectively randomly throw dice into a bowl and we pull. That's the way it was presented in that presentation, was the implication that we are just randomly. And my statement was I simply ignored that part of the presentation because I have sat here for 2 years and listened and had agencies come in and had professionals like yourself explain why things are important to go certain places. I'm not saying that we can't clean up or clear up or make rules. I'm simply saying I ignored that part of the presentation because of the way it was presented, which was the implication that we were just
I'm
randomly
sorry.
throwing
I didn't catch
things
that.
a hat in the air kind of thing.
You were talking about the presentation that was written in the
Tracy
packet.
Heitsch's presentation,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So, because
Okay.
she had like a grid and these.
Apologize. That I mistook. I thought you were saying you ignore this part of the funding process.
No,
which
she
is
had a
really
grid
important.
up, and there were like 3 things that were HCDC recommendations.
It sounds like
on her.
it sounds like you're objecting to the heavy impression given that
Right.
if you don't specify every single tiny scenario, you're just in some endless subjective pool.
Well, once again, it was just the
I think-
implication.
I also object to that, and I noticed that it was toned down quite a bit from the preliminary
Okay.
report.
And I think last year during the process, I was impressed how the commission really tried to get it as non-subjective as possible. And I think that's the message we can get to Tracy and to the council.
Right.
I mean,
No.
it's never going to be perfect because we don't have enough money. But, it's much improved over the last 30 years, Kyle.
No, and I apologize, Beck. I was not making reference to I was making a reference on what that presentation that I watched for city council, that I was just kind of, when those two popped up and they started kind of referencing, it almost seemed like it was a slap in the face to the people that are sitting here that are doing the work, because it was very much like, oh, they don't, like staff doesn't make recommendations and they don't really, like they just kind of randomly make decisions on, and yeah. So
Yeah. No,
I turned my ears off
Yeah.
about halfway through
I
that. So.
listened to Tracy and I didn't get that sense.
Okay,
so.
good.
And I know that when poor Brianna, when I was doing applications, I think I would call her every 5 minutes. Okay, I got another problem here. How do I score this one because this and this and this? One of the things that I thought would be helpful is, I think it's been really helpful having the agencies come in and give us progress reports, but I'm real curious about the ones we've just funded. And so I want to see some regular, whether they're written reports, whether they're quarterly reports, and if we can have some sort of synopsis on those. And I think one of the things I want to see is, because I take a look at an agency in terms of what they said they were going to do and what they actually did. Now, I'm not saying you have to be spot on, because nobody can be spot on. And the city is really good. I think city staff is really good about creating contracts for agencies with a little bit of wiggle room, for a lack of a better word. But I would, rather than have, and I know that the Little Creations situation came in right as I was coming on, but I'd like to see, hopefully they're regular, and you guys may be already doing this, I've just been here a year, regular reports in terms of, who's doing what. Like, are they hitting their markers that they told us when they were applying for the money that they wanted to hit. So I'm constantly going to social media and trying to watch and see what they're doing, because I'm just interested in if they're hitting those markers or not, so.
Well,
Can I back up just a little bit and ask you, is this on?
yes.
Okay. Can I ask when the presentation was that Tracy gave? Was that to city council?
It was at the last city council meeting.
Oh,
It was the link that was in our emails, the video link to the YouTube. It started at, was it the work part? Yeah, it was, I don't know, 20.
The work session, but yeah.
It was at 4, I think.
You're not on mic.
I was just saying it was the
Well,
work
there's a second
session,
link.
not the-
On a shorter, which was a blast from the past, because Kingsley was a councilman, and I think I saw Andy Johnson in the audience, so, from the county. So, did you see that little one? There was some sort of like 5-minute promo type thing on the city's decision back in, 2016, 17? for the program. Oh, I watched that one also.
Yeah, Carol, I just watched Tracy Height-Schuh's presentation. Maybe it was she was saying from
It
the
was,
earlier.
Just trying to remember that coming in my emails, and
No, it was in
sometimes.
Oh, it was
sent an
on my
email out.
agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
one
can
that-
resend it to you, Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me?
I can send it to you.
Oh,
I'll
that
email
would
it to
be
you.
helpful for me, because then I would understand what they're talking about.
Sure.
I mean, basically, she was she went through the plan in PowerPoint form and then expanded on a few points. But the information itself was mostly from the plan.
Can I make a comment about what you said, Becky, about us trying to make sure that when applicants are allocated money and the projects are being implemented, that you want more information about progress and stuff. I honestly think that's the job of the staff, and I think that when the if the staff have concerns, they bring it to us. But they're receiving the quarterly reports. They're monitoring the projects, and it just sounds to me a little bit like it's not our role to monitor
I guess
constantly. Every applicant come in every quarter. That's, it's a lot of work.
No, and I'm not talking about that. It could even be just a brief report, but I want to know that I have some serious concerns about some of the applicants and whether or not they
I
can
do
reach
too.
their milestones. I really do. And I am not asking to see the quarterly reports, but I'd like to know, even if it's just a report in like a staff report, like I might have done a director's report for my agency
Yeah.
type of thing, just something in
Okay.
there. I just want a brief thing. I don't want to have the agencies come in all the time. That's not what I'm suggesting, but I'd like to get a little bit of information about whether or not some of the projects are, hitting their milestones.
I think the year-end reports that we collect would be more helpful than quarterly.
Okay.
If that's something you guys want to see, we can put those on the website or get them to you otherwise, but we do review those. For aid to agencies, I look at the quarterly reports before I give their next payment, just to make sure they're reporting and still doing everything. Then we get year-end reports from those agencies, and I do a report where it shows how many they've served. It doesn't have a ton of detail, but it's just kind of a total count of how many we served with that funding, which I can provide to you as well.
I think that would be helpful,
Okay.
yeah. Whatever you think would be best. I'm not going to say I want this or that, but I think it would be helpful to get some sort of information.
Yeah, so our fiscal year is ending the end of this month, so like in a month or two, we'll have all those reports.
Back to the Affordable Housing Action Plan.
So-
I just want to go on record to say that I think it would be really wonderful if they would get rid of the affordable housing location model. And I know that there's people on the council and there's people on staff that have heard me say that for many years, but
And that was recommendation number one.
Yes,
by
it
them. I
was.
agree wholeheartedly.
So on the action plan, on the things that directly apply to us, I thought both recommendations were good. I think the first one we've already been implementing and trying to implement, which is that we see staff scores before we do the CDBG home
I've been trying
funding. Oh.
I've been trying to educate myself on all of this, and I'm not sure that I read anywhere what the model is and why it's not working. So is there an
Let me
eas-
let me
is there an
hand you this. I
easy-
printed out the actual.
Is there an easy explanation?
Yeah, this first paragraph very well explains it.
Wonderful.
And I printed out the whole thing. It's what you can get online, but it's the advantage of having a copy in my office.
The second recommendation, insofar as it applies to aid to agencies, I would encourage you to implement it. Some sort of process for that. I agreed with every word of what the recommendations say about us, with the notable exception of the following sentence. Discrepancies with staff scores should be included in the final recommendations to City Council. No, they shouldn't. Absolutely not.
Read that again. I hear you.
Discrepancies with staff scores should be included in the final recommendations to the City Council. If the commission is functioning properly, you should have already considered staff scores when you make a recommendation to the City Council. You receive the staff scores, you take those seriously, you do your own scores, you have a discussion. That includes staff scores as well, that discussion. And if that goes to City Council, both your recommendation and staff scores, then staff scores are just counted twice. So I would encourage you not to send staff scores to City Council.
So-
It's just going to put you in conflict with staff. If you disagree with staff scores, you'll spend all your time fighting staff. Whereas it's your job as a commission to send scores to the City Council. That's what you do.
So the question I have, not knowing the background on that, how did that come about? I mean, what happened to make that a recommendation? Because something must have happened where staff scores were
Some of these
higher,
feelings were hurt.
maybe, and commission made
Carol, you can
a
keep that copy if you want.
different decision, bad decision.
I can print another one tomorrow.
Listen,
I don't exactly know. I know that it was a topic of the preliminary recommendations. It seemed to be more the point about the subjectivity of scoring processes and things like that, and the expertise question. There was some thought that, I mean, I don't want to get into cynical reasons. I mean, they might just want staff to do the scores, but I don't want to get into that.
I think you may have a comment from the public, but I also could comment on this if it's appropriate for you.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if it's the scoring that's really the situation with staff, but there's been a couple instances in projects that you guys have reviewed where we had to recapture funding where staff recommended against the project, and we spent a year and hours and hours and hours of staff time on this project to not have any accomplishments or any outcome or any spending. So if there's a discrepancy and staff's making a recommendation against a project, I think council should be considering that because it's based on our knowledge of the federal programs and the timelines and the capacity of the agency. I don't know if it's really the scoring in particular, but there's certain things that we're looking at where we know a project might not be able to move forward, and that's going to be a lot of our time used where we could be putting that towards other projects that can move forward.
Is that information that you share with this commission before it goes to council?
Yeah, if we had a recommendation like that, we would do a memo. Usually we have a memo with our recommendations kind of explaining things that you can't really tell from the score, so
That makes
you guys
sense.
would have that information as well.
I could see there being a case for sharing a specific staff recommendation against funding a particular agency on certain grounds. That makes sense. That's defensible. I wouldn't send all staff scores. And I wouldn't send all recommendations. I would only send that kind
well,
of
they get all of
recommendation.
our minutes, Matt, so they can read. They can read this. They can see the scores. They can see the recommendations. They can see the discussion.
That's true. Yeah.
So they.
Well, I mean,
But there are different ways of presenting information. I wouldn't put it in a special presentation that they're actually going to look at.
If the recommendation comes from us that says, here's the recommendation is made by the committee, however, please note that staff said we should do this instead.
Right. I mean,
The
anyone,
implication there is that these people are dumb and made a wrong decision, and you should go with staff. That is the
Exactly.
implication.
And that's exactly what happens with planning and zoning.
And that is the implication,
Exactly.
and I agree with Matt entirely. If they want to know staff scores, City Council can absolutely, at any point,
And
email
if-
Erica and Bree and say, hey, what did you guys score this at? What was
and if
your
planning and
recommendation?
zoning does do it that way, then my recommendation to planning and zoning would be to do it the way we do it.
well,
Right.
I got to tell you, seeing what happened with, again, Little Creations, and I don't even know. In fact, I haven't read the old minutes. I'm going to go back now and read the old minutes because I'm curious as to how that project got funded, to tell you the truth.
But
And I have to say something that we dealt with it at least one or two meetings before somebody after the meeting told me, yeah, there were questions about whether or not this should have been funded. And that, frankly, really irritated me, that if there are real concerns about whether or not they had the capability to carry out that project, we just created a whole bunch of hard feelings all the way around the place. I hated coming in as a new commissioner and saying, yep, we're going to have to pull funding back on this, not a way to win friends and influence people at all. And I think that if staff are concerned that a really bad decision has been made, I'm sorry, but I agree. I think they should, a staff member should go to council on that one. I think council should probably override it,
To be fair, in the
Well,
case of Little
regardless.
Creations, no money was lost to the
Time,
to the city.
staff time was lost.
But when we were considering the decision, we were balancing, this is an agency that has special difficulty getting funds. It serves community members who aren't generally served. And their score was low-ish, but it wasn't dreadfully low. I mean, I think they were scoring like a 60 or so on the 100-point scale. So it's not like there was this agency that was just on fire, that there was just no way they were going to complete a project, and we decided to fund them anyway. It was more like
You funded
there was
them
a-
anyway, and they 100% failed. I mean, that's the fact. They 100% failed in what they had
And we
to
won't
do.
have a 100% success rate with funding, and sometimes we have to pull money back. I mean,
Even some of the big kids don't always get all the houses built they planned on building.
if we really were going to if the goal were to eliminate all risk, we would just give all our money to Shelter House all the time.
No, that's not true.
mean, that would-
That is not true. Don't even say that. That's a horrible thing to say publicly. That's just not true.
I mean, there's always some risk, and we have to take that risk and weigh it against
Well,
what we're getting for the
I'm
funds.
entitled to my opinion, and I
Sure.
actually agree on that because that was my very first task on this commission is pulling back funding, and boy, that didn't feel good.
Absolutely, and nobody likes pulling back funding.
I don't mind.
And regardless, overall, we think that the plan is pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so are we supposed to deliver something to the council about this? No, okay. So,
We just duked it out among ourselves.
we just duke it out, but let's not duke it out for another hour.
Let's go on to something else
Yes.
more interesting.
Move it on.
Do we have any additional comments on the action plan?
It's crazy.
All right, we'll go on to number 5.
Are you going to see if there's any public comments?
Sorry. Yeah, I haven't gotten used to that yet. Do we have any public comments on the Affordable Housing Action Plan draft?
I mean, I guess looking through it, it clearly states here's what an individual is able to pay
Ask
based
him
off
his name.
SSI, or what a single person can pay for a one-bedroom apartment. Whereas we're seeing these prices in Iowa City continually go up because brand new buildings are being built, and those have brand new appliances and.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you please state your name for the commission?
Yeah, my name is Zachary Slocum.
You have to come,
And so I'm just curious.
Come on up and use my mic. So
you got
I'm just curious with this new affordable housing plan, how the city or the council plans on bringing about more affordable housing. Is it through generating better practices with construction, especially with the city is trying to become more green, so we're taking that into account as well. So what is the plans with building brand new constructions and making it affordable to people coming in, because the city is just growing too, so we're running out of housing as well.
do you have a copy of this?
What is it?
This is the actual plan.
I have it on my laptop.
Okay.
Just curious as what the idea is. How do we plan on building brand new sustainable housing for everybody, especially considering the population is only continuing to rise within our community?
And that's a great question to ask the people who put the plan together, which was not us.
Gotcha. Sweet.
I
Sorry.
mean, I guess that's where I'm at.
And I still come back to what I come
Yeah.
back to all the time, the word affordable. That is so subjective in itself.
Right, they have a definition,
And
but it
there are
doesn't
many people who don't make enough money to be able to afford the fair market rent, which is what HUD puts out, and so many landlords who have obtained, tax financing for their buildings, and then in return, they have so many low-income units. But if they put it at the fair market rental rate, which right now is $803,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who can't pay that. So that's just my 2 cents about the word affordable. And I'm sorry I hijacked your train of
No,
thought.
not at all. I appreciate the answer. So then I guess what it is I would take my concerns towards the organization that put this packet forward and ask them these questions and then bring.
Council.
Council, yeah.
Okay.
City council.
Perfect.
I mean, I will say, and Matt may, actually anybody here, I will say that if you go through this whole packet, they did get input from the Home Builders Association. They did get ICAR input, and there is a lot of discussion about exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, how do we put money into what's it called, age-in properties for people who want to be able to stay, and how do you make those changes so they don't have to get pushed out because now they need handicap, but they're in an older.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about that and recommendations made to council in this packet for that. A lot of development recommendations that address those same kind of issues. Well, like we were talking about, getting rid of that affordable housing location model that says, well, you can only build in these specific spots, but instead, I think the addition of, what do they call them, additional ADUs? Like the addition of ADUs, additional dwelling units, which, like your old mother-in-law type quarters.
Right.
Right now, Iowa City has a very restrictive policy, like you have to be owner-occupied, it has to be in the property, it has to be attached.
Okay.
Making some allowances for that kind of stuff is addressed in the packet. But yeah, I mean, I'd give you this copy if you want a print copy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a lot easier to look at than scrolling through 143 pages online, so.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
You just wanted to get rid of that, didn't you?
I was about to say exactly the same thing.
Could you make me a copy? No, I'm just teasing.
Yep, I sure can.
I
I'm
can.
gonna show up at your office, but.
Do we have any additional public comment on the action plan? Right. Well, we'll go on to number 5. This is we're looking at the bylaws and we're discussing a potential amendment to, hold on, Article 4, Section B. It's the list of requirements that we have for members. And the proposal came from Becky, and I'll turn it over to Becky to say a word about it. But I think our boundaries here is that we can't vote on it yet, and I think the reason is because it has to appear on 2 agendas.
Probably.
Yeah. So.
Bylaws are like that, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll turn it over to Becky. You can say a word about it, and then we can have a discussion. Probably we would be looking at hammering out the language of what we would want to discuss at the next meeting, or what all of you would discuss at the next meeting.
Yeah. So the issue is Article 4, Section B, under membership. But I want to briefly talk afterwards about Section A of that same article, which is something we referenced about expenses. Wait a minute. Yeah. So this is where the Section B talks about the specific appointments of individuals, at least one person with the expertise in finance. When possible, commission shall include one person who receives rental assistance. And I thought that I had seen something else where they wanted somebody, and Kaya, I know your background is in housing also, and I think that's helpful too. I've learned actually quite a bit from you. And these, from what I can see, were amended in 2017, which was about 5 years ago. I'm not sure that they've been done since then, staff. Do you think so? I would suggest that we consider adding a person with nonprofit management experience. And that is because this commission in the past 10 years, I cannot remember when Linda Severson had the responsibilities of agencies, but upon her death, the city moved it to the Housing Community Development Commission, and it's kind of gone through phases of how it gets managed. And I think it's helpful to have somebody from with a nonprofit background on here because there are unique circumstances, unique learning that somebody has with a nonprofit, and a lot of our work is in terms of making decisions about nonprofit budgets and funding approval. So that's what I would recommend. So I'll let you discuss that before I ask about A.
Yeah.
What do the bylaws currently require? Are there any current member requirements? I couldn't find
Yeah.
a copy of them.
4B.
Thanks.
4B.
Yeah, the current ones, there's a requirement
Right
that
down
there
there,
be a
4B.
person who receives rental assistance. Let me see what the other ones are and make sure I get them
It says when
exactly right.
possible.
When possible,
But
yeah.
yeah, they're all contingent. They're all when possible. Yeah, expertise in construction, expertise in finance, and rental assistance. I don't know that we fulfill the expertise in construction requirement right now. It is contingent.
Excuse me.
Oh, okay, we do. And for Becky, one question I have is, I mean, you obviously don't see this as overlapping with expertise in finance. So what you're looking for is not finance expertise.
No, no, I think it's different. And I'll point out, when we did emergent agency awards, I actually think I was the only one that had questions, but one of my big questions was with regard to the lack of submission of any funding from other municipalities or other sources, and looked like 100% of the funds were going to come from Iowa City to do work in Johnson County. And I think that's just something I can easily identify because I've done so many applications. I mean, 40 years worth of these kinds of things. So I do think it's helpful having somebody, from nonprofit management experience. Hopefully you get somebody who's had to apply, who's written funding requests, somebody who's had some approval of them also. So I think it's just helpful. It gives a different perspective.
Have you done that, Becky?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah.
Lots, federal and private and. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they have to, but if there's a couple of people the council's considering and there isn't a person, the council might sway to, this person has this background, and so let's appoint this person to the commission.
I agree with you on this, that I think it would be very beneficial to this commission to have that kind of expertise. Because we do have a spatial understanding of all the inner workings and day-to-day things of nonprofits, and we can take a look at, I think in a more unique way, what the strengths are in terms of completing projects that they're applying for funding for.
Yeah. Yep.
I have a question, a related question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering, and I'm not sure if this would be a role of the commission or a role of the staff, but I guess my question is about folks bringing that kind of nonprofit managerial experience when the agencies are applying, especially I'm considering kind of the emerging agencies, kind of how much support the commission or the staff gives those applicants in the application process, in terms of kind of grant application fluency. I think a lot of folks don't have that, but might in fact have not capacity to submit the best grant application, but the capacity to do the project that they're proposing is fine. They can do it. And I was just wondering if folks on this commission offer support of that kind to prospective applicants, and I think having folks with that experience in kind of support roles for prospective applicants could be great. So I guess it's a question and a statement.
Well, I'll just tell you that there's not much, I don't think any of us do that, but there's not much going on in the community either. They used to do some leadership trainings that kind of 5 or 6 years ago, they kind of went away. I thought Community Foundation was going to do some training surrounding grant applications and being on the other side of it too. Help and how do I make decisions about funding, because we have lots of community folk. But I don't see us, I don't look for a typo doesn't bother me, that I have to ask a question doesn't bother me. I don't think we're that kind of a group, and I don't believe the agencies feel like that also, that
that's awesome.
I never felt once, if I made a mistake, that I couldn't explain it during the process and have the mistake kind of go. I didn't lose sleep over it, let me put it like that. So,
And you guys offer training
Right.
yeah.
before the applications are due. So that,
Well, not to aid agencies, I don't think, do you?
No, that's through
Oh.
the joint funding process, but
Okay.
typically if we do CDBG and home or some of the other programs, we
Yeah.
do like a workshop or an orientation.
I don't
And
think
you
it would
guys
be
have
our
said-
role.
yeah.
I don't think it would be our role
Right.
to provide support on application preparation and then decide who's going to get the money.
Right.
Because we would be, I mean, that's
Sure.
sort of.
But if someone
that kind of gets
calls-
muddy. They
Yeah.
can
Someone
call the
calls to
staff.
ask a question, you guys, I mean, I've
Oh,
heard
yeah.
you talk about numerous people you've had
Sure.
conversations with
Sure.
and helped them through the process. I mean,
Yes.
staff is absolutely there to help anybody who's working on an application.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
I've got
And
a
I wouldn't
question-
mean directly that anyone sitting here would go have coffee with someone and help
Okay,
them write
good.
their application, but
Well, I might have coffee with them, but I'm not going to tell, I'm
Tell
not
them
going to
what
review their
to write.
application.
but more about kind of creating an opportunity
Buy me
for
beer.
some literacy around that process. And I guess I think it would be additive if someone had done that and could bring, that kind of, a person in that role that you're requesting here would, I think, be positioned to know what was needed to develop that kind of fluency in. I don't know.
A question about language that might help you have a final draft of this. Are you looking for another when possible clause here? Or are you
Yeah.
looking for a hard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine with me.
Can I
Yeah.
throw a secondary wrench into that equation?
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, can we also say whenever possible, a member shall come from the private sector residential property management side of things?
I think that
No.
would be good.
I'd oppose. Of course, it doesn't matter.
No.
I'm
I'll
not going to
support
vote.
that. No, I think that these are the people that I learned from. I don't have expertise. I have my little area, but I have learned some things sitting on this commission about, from other people. So I'd support that too. If there's a third,
I mean, if you were looking for categories, the one that jumped out to me, the group that I think I've learned a lot from on the commission and as an expanding member of the community, an immigrant seat on the commission is a group that I would include. I think this commission should always have an immigrant.
Can we do that?
well,
I don't know if we can or not. It's just,
If-
that would be the.
I may touch on that
we
when
put
I
on there.
talk about Section A a little bit. Let's talk about diversity.
Section A.
When we talk
Section 8.
Section A. I just don't want to,
Okay.
I have a tendency to put forward all of my things, and I'm trying to hold back.
But I mean, it sounds like the proposal is, it's pretty clear what it is. I mean, you're proposing to add a when possible, the commission includes not someone with expertise in nonprofit management.
And Kyle, what did you say?
I mean, private sector residential property management.
Yeah, and that might be a
specific.
proposal as
Let's
well.
add those.
Well, I mean,
I mean, that's what I did too.
Can you explain,
private sector?
can you explain why?
Doesn't
And I kind of have a question for
guess I
staff as
consider
well. Is the idea that you want to kind of
private sector, I guess,
sketch these out and then have the commission vote on them
I
at
mean,
the
I
next
think-
mean?
No, you
I think
don't.
for-profit, I guess is what I'm thinking.
That's
Like,
what
There
you're
needs to be
thinking.
more discussion
Yeah.
at the next
Yeah,
meeting.
I
I
get what
think
you're
you can
saying,
continue
but
to
yeah.
talk about it,
Okay.
but you can't vote until the next meeting. But if you're not ready to vote by the second meeting, that's fine too, if you want to keep fleshing it out.
Okay.
So,
Can you help me understand why a private sector property management?
Well, Mary and I are kind of having a side conversation over there because it doesn't really define what I think. So we have not done anything with this in the 2 years I've been on. But part of this discussion, part of what we're supposed to do is occasionally look at the policies and procedures of the Iowa City Department, like Housing Department and Inspection Department, and make
that's a housing
recommendations.
authority,
And I no, what does it say?
not the building department.
The Housing Inspection.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, the housing stands group. I just call it stands group. But that's supposed to be part of our responsibilities as well, is like to go over those regularly and make recommendations. And we haven't done any of that, but.
No, it's not. It's Public Housing Authority and Community Development Division.
Yeah, so it's not
Okay, but
Stan's group.
hold on. On the main page, it also says, to recommend to City Council from time to time amendments, supplements, changes, and modifications of the Iowa City Housing Code.
Okay.
So, which to me, I mean, is what I'm dealing with on a daily basis, whether it's how many square feet of occupancy we need, or how many parking spaces we have in order to get 4 people in a house versus 3, or how many times a year, you know, if you live in a house that has 4 or more units, you don't get inspected but every 2 years. But if you live in a duplex or a single family property, we are now having inspections every year. I mean, you know, and we've had that discussion here, which it all ties into affordability. You know, landlords have seen their inspection costs, their cost from housing inspections double in the last 3 years, because just they're coming through more and more often. You know, when we're talking about people building properties, it's way easier to build it in Coralville because they inspect your place once and then don't show up again unless there's a complaint. I mean, it's a whole different model in Iowa City. So I guess, I guess, Mary Ann, even if we are talking about private sector, even if it is somebody like that was doing that at a nonprofit, because you guys dealt with this as well, and I know the Iowa City Housing Fellowship as well, where you guys were dealing with inspections and,
Oh, yeah.
you know, so that's where I was thinking of, just someone that's not just managing a nonprofit, not someone who's just building buildings or handling the finance side, but someone who is literally day to day in the trenches with inspectors on site at these properties. I mean, I'm doing that 10 to 12 hours a week now. 10 to 12 hours a week on properties, responding to the whims of city council. If, you know, suddenly on the north side, somebody wants a beautification process to happen.
Let's do.
I don't know how the wording would be.
If possible, because you're specifically talking about rental housing, so you're not talking about
right.
owner-occupied housing or shelter or, you know, that stuff. So you could say, when possible, a property manager. It doesn't have to be private sector, because that implies for-profit.
Right, yeah. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, you're right. But I mean, even if it's Iowa City Housing Fellowship, or like you said.
But the Housing Fellowship is a private corporation.
Right, yeah. But it's not a for-profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, yeah, or even just property manager. We could just say that.
501c3 is a tax status.
Yeah.
That's it. That's income tax. It's not property tax. It's nothing else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'd be fine with just using the phrase property management. I mean, I think that
When
covers.
it's all when possible.
Carol, I think Carol wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
I heard you say, as part of a rationale for minimizing the number of inspections, is that, you know, well, unless a complaint comes up. But speaking from a renter's.
Oh, no. I'm not used. I'm just pointing out that that's the difference between Coralville and Iowa City right now is.
No, earlier you said this.
No, I just was
Let her
pointing
say
out.
what she
Oh,
was
sorry. Go
gonna
ahead. Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say about this is that low-income renters, especially the lowest of the income, won't make a complaint because they need their housing.
Right.
And if they complain, the chance of retaliation is very high. And so a lot of times renters won't complain about something, even if it's a really major issue.
Right. And I was not making that recommendation
Okay.
for Iowa City.
Okay.
What I was pointing out is up until 2 years ago, every property was on everything in Iowa City was on an every 2-year inspection schedule. And then 2 years ago, they switched to just single family and duplex being every year.
So
It purely a issue of increased cost, increased manpower, especially for me in the property management side. It's not just the rental permit fee. You know, my owners, then I have to raise my fees because now I'm having to do twice the amount of work. So those rental property owners have to raise rents in order to cover both my additional fees for time and I was pointing out that those are the kind of differences that are important to have a discussion here when we are talking about affordable housing, because those things do add up. And so I just would like to see that voice being heard
Actually,
when possible.
both what you both had to say is really interesting to me, not being a housing person.
Oh, it's-
So,
yeah.
I didn't really know that.
Well, and if it's something that could have been caused by the tenant,
Yeah.
and the tenant's very low income,
Right.
then that cost of repair could be passed on to the tenant,
Right.
which they may not have the money for. So
Right.
that could be one.
One example I'll give is a rental place that I was in where I was very happy because the rent was something that was reasonable.
Right.
And actually was priced below what similar rentals were. There became a problem with the plumbing, which was a major issue. And it was determined after 2 or 3 days that it was not anything that I had done. It wasn't the renter's responsibility. It actually had something to do with the property being very old and tree roots.
Oh, yeah, roots.
Doing things, and then it being plugged up, by where the city hooks on. But the landlord wanted to raise my rent because, by golly, he had to spend $600 on these people.
Can't do that.
So, I mean, that
Not
sort
till
of
next
thing
month.
happens.
Right, next lease.
I don't know if that's out of context with what we're talking about, but that sort of thing happens.
Yeah.
I think it's
Well, and
all
regardless, we
helpful
could-
information,
Yeah, we
to hear.
can add that. I don't have any problems with adding any of those to the bylaws, except I would really ask about, I think it would be better to say, something about diversity instead of specifically an immigrant, because I'm not sure.
Well,
But
I want to
can I
address that in A.
Can I just finish? But we can put anything in here what we want, but it all comes down to who applies.
Well,
And,
right.
we've been experiencing some difficulty, so I'm okay to extend that to, as diverse and as to point out specific expertise that would be very helpful to the commission. But again, it depends on who applies.
I think what I would encourage you to do is to sort of sketch out the possibilities and then, go through each possibility at the July meeting and do the discussion and vote. Whether you want to do diversity or immigrant is up to you. I would encourage you to do an immigrant seat if you
Okay.
can, because I specifically meant the immigrant experience rather than diversity in general.
Can we move on to another section?
And
Well,
I think
do you want to move on to A? Because
Oh, no.
I think you have
I
a
did
proposal on A, right? Yeah.
Well, on A, so I remember we had this conversation, it might have been post-meeting with staff, where I thought I had read someplace that there was reimbursements for expenses like parking or something like that. But, so this is where I got it from, and I think I interpreted it one way, whether or not it means it, but all members shall be qualified electors of the City of Iowa City and shall serve as such without compensation, but shall be entitled to necessary expenses, including travel expenses incurred in the discharge of their duties. So to me, that would be, but I want to take it a little bit farther and farther and discuss accommodating individuals, whether it's somebody who is let's talk about diverse population who has, who may have a language barrier, who may have a transportation barrier, who may have a childcare barrier. I actually think that the city should be encouraging people with, I don't want to say special needs because I think that connotes something different than what I'm saying, but the city should be encouraging diversity, any individual to participate in the commission process, and the city would help with, any accommodations that they would need that might preclude them being on the commission. So that's where I thought that maybe we could, make a statement about we want to promote, diversity, inclusion, of individuals with different kinds of backgrounds, whether that's race or ethnicity or, but.
Or even just a single mom who doesn't have.
Absolutely. Somebody who needs childcare assistance, maybe they need, they may need $30 to be able to come to a meeting. I mean,
Is this something that other commissions do? Or anyone else in the
reimbursed
city?
for expenses?
Yeah.
I know this came up with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It did go to council, and I believe they opted not to
no,
provide any
totally
reimbursement.
different issue. They wanted to be paid. They wanted a salary. And I'm suggesting something entirely different. And I think the city should be doing this commission-wide, citywide. It shouldn't just be for us. But I do think that it would be helpful. If somebody doesn't have transportation and has to take a bus but can't afford the bus fare, why can't the city reimburse for that?
I'm pretty sure we do that.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's an option.
But it would be extending, what can the city do? And,
Yeah.
in
It's in
terms of
here.
other things. Does it?
Well, I mean, no, but
What
it says
traveling expenses?
I think
Just travel.
I think the current language would allow it, which
I
was kind of
think if-
surprising to me. I didn't
Oh, you're right.
realize it.
I love to read bylaws.
it says
I read them,
including-
back when they handed them out months ago.
I mean, Mary Ann points out, it says necessary expenses, including
It
travel
doesn't- I mean,
expenses. So
It's not just traveling.
I guess
mean,
the argument is someone could easily send in a
Yeah, this
request.
is surprising to me, but I think the current language would allow for reimbursement for bus travel to HCDC meetings.
Well,
I'm
as
pretty
well
sure.
as necessary expenses like childcare.
I don't know about other expenses, but I'm pretty sure in the time that I've been here, there are ways that we can help provide whatever it is, the reimbursement for a bus ticket or something like that. I don't know
think
exactly
needs
how
to
it
be
works.
Better spelled out in here if it's beyond just
Yeah,
travel
yeah.
expenses. But I think that's where that inclusion and
It-
the
yeah.
recruitment.
It's not obvious from the current language. You do kind of
not
have
at
to
all.
read into it a bit.
Nope. Because when I mentioned it, I think somebody was surprised. I said, well, I've read it someplace, is that there's some travel reimbursement.
How about 4?
I think when we were complaining about the parking, which I've got another complaint for tonight.
Well,
That's why
that's-
I was late.
But it's 6:30, you don't have to pay for parking now.
In the ramps, you do.
No, you're not, no,
Don't
you
you?
don't. I don't
Yeah,
think
you
so.
do.
Not at the Chauncey Swan, no.
And you know,
don't
the
know about
elevator,
the
I
one
think,
over
if
there.
the center's locked, is locked.
The elevator here
Yeah,
or the
'Cause it-
one?
over here.
No,
So
I
for-
used the one right out
Oh,
here.
you
Yeah, I
did?
used it
Yeah,
too.
I
I
sat
did
in there
too.
for a long time pressing. What
Oh, no,
floor are
it's
we
just the
on?
door. You just push the door open.
But I kind of with this agenda item, I'd like to get the commission into good enough shape to where you feel like when you go into next month's meeting, you're ready to have a discussion and vote. And so I want to see if we're there.
I was going to offer, based on the discussion, we can kind of flesh out something for the packet based on what we've heard today, and I can get some details on what that travel reimbursement does include and bring that to the next meeting.
Travel plus reimbursement. I mean, what else might the city be willing to do? And I think you got to get that from staff. I don't think we can say this is what we want the city to do. So,
And what are necessary expenses? I think that's just a good question to ask.
yeah.
Because it says necessary expenses including travel. It doesn't say,
Well, and it may not even be expense, but what if somebody does have a language barrier? Will the city help in terms of,
Translation
providing
or-
interpretation
yeah.
services or something like that? So
necessary expenses.
necessary accommodations, I think, is a better.
That could
We
be.
can
Paid or
accommodate,
unpaid.
we
That'd
can
be good.
accommodate translation services. We
Pardon?
can do that.
Yeah.
Well, Becky just said necessary accommodations, which might,
Yeah, paid or unpaid. So I think for you all, in between now and the next meeting might be, talking to, Tracy and/or whoever about what the city would be willing to do.
Mary Ann, what section were you wanting to look at?
well, I have just a question about Section 5. Because I was appointed to the committee to fill an unexpired term. And then it says, in such manner that the appointee shall continue in the position not only through the unexpired term, but also through a subsequent regular term. So I had to reapply.
I
Go
think
through
council
council
tries to
again.
give you preference if you
What?
haven't. I think council's pretty good about giving preference to people that didn't get a full term. But you did have to fill out an application, I guess. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it doesn't
That's not what
sound,
that implies.
it sounds like I didn't have to reapply.
I can ask about it and
Okay.
see.
That's how I interpreted that, too.
That's what I was thinking.
We just like
Yeah.
to see you jumping through hoops.
They just want to read my resume one more time.
What's that?
Okay,
Who is she again?
yeah. Who
Did
is
you
that?
just ask him to
Mary
pull up
what?
the
Mouthy?
old one?
That mouthy woman. Okay,
What section is that? It's meeting, is it, no, it's not meetings. You
Right
said,
before meeting, 4D or something.
oh, 4D.
4F.
it's section
Four
F.
Fs.
Yeah,
Okay.
4F. Article 4, Section F.
Yeah, it does say that.
Okay, now my,
Yeah. So that needs to be updated.
Well, it either needs to be updated or
The council did it
needs to
wrong.
be prodded to follow it.
I think the council had the option to choose how they filled your initial term, and I think they must have chosen that short term rather than like a longer term all at once. So I'm guessing that's what happened. The way it's worded is they may choose to have you
I see.
continue into the next term.
okay.
I should have known the council would follow the rules. So I think, Brianna, you're planning to put together a kind of list of proposals for everyone to have.
Draft amendments.
I think.
Yeah, I was going to say I can just write it in red, the changes, and then you can look at it at the next meeting, propose any additional changes and vote on it.
I assume this would be helpful. It's really the rest of your call.
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Do it. Do it.
And do we have any other discussion on this topic? All right, number 6, Iowa City Council meeting updates. I wrote down that Elizabeth was doing this. Hopefully I wrote down correctly.
I did it. Woohoo. You ready? Give me some grace as I'm still learning what is and isn't relevant to the committee as far as updates are concerned. But I'll start with the June 6th meeting. A lot of the public comment was about the recent video circulating of the ICPD using force on a young woman. And I think this is connected to our work in so far as houselessness and rapid development of certain kinds, gentrification, are linked to over-policing. Councillor Burgess was the only member of council to address the incident and to remind the council of their commitment in the summer of 2020 to change the equation regarding law enforcement funding relative to social services funding in our community, which directly impacts the activities here. The council also mentioned in that meeting that inflation is hitting city projects, including those relevant to this committee. Escucha Mi Voz talked about their constituents' experiences accessing direct payments, funded in part by city ARPA funds, and including barriers to completion of the application. And I suspect that some of that direct payment did go to housing for folks experiencing housing insecurity in our
Elizabeth,
community.
I'm sorry. I'm having trouble understanding you, and it may
Yeah.
just be me, but can you talk a little slower?
Sure, yes, I can
Thank you.
try.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for telling me. The City Council voted to deny Catholic Worker House a social and racial equity grant for a Spanish language newsletter and education around political engagement. For anyone that doesn't know, Catholic Worker House serves folks experiencing houselessness. Their site, it appears, is now offering showers and food. They used to offer shelter pre-COVID. They also coordinate protective accompaniments for those facing deportation, deportation defense, and basic needs like food and rental assistance, among other things. So that's my update for June 6th. And then meeting 2 was on this Tuesday, June 21st. Much of the public comment was around preservation of the Robert E. Lee Pool, which is related to our work, and that it's helpful to consider what kinds of public amenities will or won't exist in neighborhoods where new affordable housing is being developed. Similarly, there were discussions around the bike and pedestrian trail along Highway 6 in southeast Iowa City, connectivity there for modes of transportation other than vehicles. And then there were several items related to approval of the fiscal year 23 annual action plan, part of City Steps 2025. And the city passed resolutions based on this committee's recommendations for fiscal year 2023 CDBG and home projects, as well as fiscal year 23 aid to agencies. The council members had questions about why there are so few applications for the Emerging Aid to Agencies grant, which were answered by staff. And staff also noted that adjusted for inflation, these programs have lost funding over the years and showed a graph about trends in funding for these programs. The council concluded, noting it will be a difficult upcoming budgeting year and that programs should expect their budgets not necessarily to grow in accordance with the kind of stated goals for growth. And that's what I had. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. And I believe we are on to number 7, staff updates. Staff.
Yeah, we have a couple updates for you. The next meeting will be July 21st. So at that meeting, we'll do officer nominations since Matt is leaving us. We'll welcome 2 new members, Zachary and Jennifer. We will review the aid to agencies process, taking a look at the application materials. You want to give an update on home ARP?
So home ARP, we initially intended to have on this agenda. Home ARP money is kind of supplemental funding that the city received, somewhat similar to our annual home funding, but a larger pot of money with some different rules. We got applications in last week and had some IT issues essentially and weren't able to fully review them until like today. So we pushed it back a month to give it more time to review. And we're also learning that the state has some home ARP money, which may require local match. So we want to make sure that our applicants are able to access that state funding. So we might have to consider that in our allocations. So we should have those applications to you ahead of the July meeting for review.
A couple other announcements. There's a tentative calendar in the packet that will show you when the next meetings are for the next year. I tried to put on what we'll probably talk about, but just keep in mind that that might change. Once we have a new chair, I can share the contact information for that person. So if there's agenda items that you guys want to talk about, you can bring it up with whoever that may be. And it's Matt's last meeting. So Matt and Peter. Peter's not here, but just wanted to say thanks to Matt. I get compliments all the time on what an awesome facilitator you are. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you,
I
Matt.
also
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
I have to say that Matt said hello to me at the farmer's market, and he didn't have a mask on, and he was standing up, and I didn't know who he was.
Next month, 21st, 28th.
I believe it's the 21st. I have just one more thing. Peter couldn't be here tonight, but he did send an email, if it's okay for me to just read a couple sentences here. He said, "I know my term is up and I really wish I could be there for a personal farewell, but it's not possible. I wanted to thank City Council for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this important commission for our city. I learned a lot in the last 3 years and I hope I made a small contribution. Addressing and improving the needs of low-income and underserved people in our community remain very important to me, and I will continue to advocate for them anytime I have the opportunity. Thank you to HCDC city staff for your support, and thank you to all members of the commission for their wisdom and dedication to our city."
Well, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
His memo about the Affordable Action Plan was really good, really succinct.
Yep. So we have a July meeting and not an August meeting. Okay, that won't change, because if it does, I'm not here in August.
Okay.
There is an 80% chance I probably won't be here for the July 21st meeting, but
Oh, so
we'll
we-
play it by ear.
So we'll only be here for about 45 minutes?
Yes, that's the goal.
Go ahead.
Well, now I'm going to show
Won't
up.
be here.
I will
We
not.
won't have
You're
a
going to call
chair.
in, I know.
So
We'll be
Well,
elected.
we do have a vice chair. That's Caleb, and Caleb will be facilitating the meeting until you have a chair.
excellent. Okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Number 8.
We can entertain a motion for adjournment.
You know, I just have
So
one more thing
moved.
real quick.
Second it.
Second.
All right.